Mr. Charles Robinson. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. It shows that you are engaged in the political process. Let me ask Donnie Glover to come up here and introduce tonight's guest. Good evening. How you doing? Who's got a voter's card? Who's got a voter's card? Okay. All right. First out, Mr. Kevin Zeese. Good evening, sir. How are you?
Good evening.
Next up, Congressman Ben Cardin. Brought some friends with you, huh? Last but not least, the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Maryland, Michael S. Steele. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the Urban League. Gentlemen, earlier we did a drawing for who was going to start with the opening statement, and the first opening statement goes to Congressman Cardin.
Thank you very much. First, let me tell you how excited and honored I am to be the Democratic nominee for the United States Senate. On the Democratic Party, we had a very spirited and competitive primary. And I'm proud that the campaigns were waged on the issues. And my hope is that in the general election, that we will talk about issues. I think we owe that to the voters of Maryland. I'm running for the United States Senate because I am concerned about the direction of America. I believe that we're moving in the wrong direction in too many fundamental areas. I want to thank the Urban League for giving us a chance tonight to talk about the issues. And I hope that during the course of this campaign that we'll have many other opportunities to debate the issues. I believe this nation is moving in the wrong direction in so many different areas. By way of example, let me just talk first about the war in Iraq. The war in Iraq has been a tragedy for many, many reasons. First, of course, is the loss of life. The war in Iraq has also caused us to lose our focus on the war against terror. Look at the article in the New York Times about the fact that we may be, in fact, encouraging more terrorism than we have solved by the war in Iraq. The war in Iraq is a tragedy because it has given us reason, given this administration reason, to challenge some of the basic principles of America. Now, all of a sudden, the United States says that torture is okay if it's in the United States. I disagree with that. The administration says that we can look at records of anybody we really want to in the United States, U.S. citizens, and we don't need any court supervision on that. I think that is wrong and not what America stands for. The war in Iraq has cost the American taxpayer $320 billion. That's $320 billion of missed opportunity right here in America. And we know that we need to invest here in America. We don't need to look any further. We don't need to look any further than Katrina. Now, Katrina was a natural disaster, but the real disaster of Katrina was government's failure to protect the people of this country. We need to invest to make sure Katrina never happens again, and we need to invest to make sure we take care of the victims of Katrina and rebuild the areas that have been devastated. Under the Bush administration, we've seen a widening of the gap in America between the rich and the poor. Under the Bush administration, we've seen a widening of the gap between those who have adequate health coverage and those that do not. Under the Bush administration, we've seen a widening gap of those who can afford education and those who cannot afford education. I disagree with those priorities. And that's one of the reasons I'm running for the United States Senate. Michael Steele and I disagree on many of the issues in this campaign. So let's talk about some of the issues. I'm for universal health coverage for all Americans. I not only support it, I have voted for universal coverage. Michael Steele supports the president on his programs on health care. So I would like Michael Steele to answer tonight why we've increased the number of uninsured over the last 6 years by 6 million, and we now have 46 million people without health insurance. How are you going to get those people insured? I disagree with Michael Steele on the Medicare prescription drug bill. I voted against it. Michael Steele supported the president on prescription drugs. This is the bill that prevented our government from negotiating price with the drug companies. Experts tell us that if we negotiate price, that we should be able to reduce the cost in the Medicare program by 2/3, 1/2 of what the Canadians pay for their own medicines. We should be paying 1/2. I want Canadians coming to America to buy their drugs. So I hope that Michael Steele will answer tonight why he supports that approach and what he's going to say to the 51,000 Marylanders who are going to go to the pharmacist sometime between now and the end of the year, and they're going to try to get their prescription drugs filled. And the pharmacist is going to say that's somewhere between $250 and $500. And they say, oh, wait a minute, I got this Medicare prescription drug card. And they say, welcome to the donut hole. I want to hear how Michael Steele is going to respond to his support of this prescription drug bill. I disagree with Michael Steele on the ability to expand embryonic stem cell research. I support it. I supported the bipartisan bill in Congress that passed by a wide margin that was vetoed by the president. Maybe Michael Steele will explain tonight why he supports the president's veto of the embryonic stem cell bill. I disagree with Michael Steele on increasing the minimum wage. I believe we should increase the minimum wage. We should have done it years ago. It's wrong for a person to work 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, not with one single day off in the entire year and live in poverty in America. That's just wrong. So I hope Michael Steele will explain tonight why he supported Bob Ehrlich's veto of the minimum wage bill. I disagree with Michael Steele on the war in Iraq. I voted against it 4 years ago. I've been a critic of the way the president has managed it. Michael Steele supported the president's decision to go to war in Iraq and has basically said the president's managed this war right. I hope Michael Steele will explain tonight how he intends to support plans that bring our troops home. I want to take my experience as a congressman, as a former state legislator and former Speaker of the House, to the United States Senate. I've been able to work across party lines to get things done, to bring about change in Washington. I have been able to be effective in bringing about change when the Democrats control the Congress and when the Republicans control the Congress. I've stood up the presidents of both parties when it's in the interest of Marylanders to have a senator who will be independent. I've done that. As a result, I've changed Washington. Seniors today get their cancer screenings covered and other preventive health care under the Medicare system thanks to legislation that I authored and was enacted into law. I've been able to change our retirement system. People can now put more money away for their own retirement thanks to legislation that I authored that was enacted into law. And when I was Speaker of the House, I made a commitment for inclusion, appointed the first African-American chairman of a standing committee in the House of Delegates, changed the staff of the General Assembly to reflect the demographics of Maryland. I'm proud of my record of bringing about change. I'm running for the United States Senate to bring about change, because I tell you, I worry about this nation. I want a country that not only has universal health coverage, I want a country that's energy independent. I believe we can get there. I've introduced legislation to do it, and I say we can become energy independent in 10 years. Let's really develop alternative and renewable energy sources, and let's take on conservation. It will not only be the right policy so we're not dependent upon any country halfway around the world for our foreign policy and oil, but it will also be the right thing for our environment, because global warming is a real issue that we need to deal with. I want to see a country that truly makes education the national priority. I've introduced legislation that would allow us to take our best teachers and put them in our schools, and for them to get a tax break so we help our local governments. I'm for a nation that gives opportunity to all of its people. All of its people. There's too many divisions in America, along racial lines, along economic lines. I want the opportunity of this great nation to be available to all of its citizens. That's what I fight for. That's what I believe in. Working together, we can build a better Maryland, a better nation that's healthier, that's safer, that's more prosperous. With your help, I will be Maryland's next United States Senator, and I will stand up for that change in Washington. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cardin. Our next opening statement will come from the Lieutenant Governor, Michael Steele.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here at this historic facility, which was part of our Underground Railroad, where freedom was sought and opportunity was realized by so many. I'd like to thank Howard Henderson and Ray Haysbert for the opportunity, and the Urban League especially for the opportunity to be here this evening to have a conversation with Maryland about our future, about our opportunity, about the things that transfix our attention at this time. I'm the son of a sharecropper's daughter who was pulled out of 5th grade to work the tobacco fields of South Carolina. And at the age of 18, she moved to Washington, D.C., where she began to work at a minimum wage job for the next 45 years. During that time, she raised 2 children. I am the product of love and hard work. I've been empowered by her perseverance and commitment. And today I stand here as the Lieutenant Governor of my state, the first African American ever elected statewide. Because this country, despite its faults and failures at times, offered an opportunity that was taken on my behalf by my mother and imbued into me through education and discipline, and here I stand. I'm the father of 2 boys. I'm your Lieutenant Governor, and I will be your next United States Senator. With all due respect to my friend and colleague here, Congressman Cardin, there are 3 individuals on this stage tonight who are running for this seat. And while his intent is to run against me, I will not ignore nor exclude Mr. Zeese, who in his own right is a candidate for this office. What you just witnessed is the problem with Washington. They run their mouths, but they do not listen. They do not take the time to look around to see who else is in the room. And after 40 years, 40 years of public service, honorable public service. 20 years as our state representative and 20 years in Congress, he still has not learned to first look around the room and shut up and listen. That was a lesson. That was a lesson. That was a lesson my mother taught me a long time ago. That if you want to be of service to others, you must first listen to them. And I have spent the last 4 years as your Lieutenant Governor listening to you. This campaign is not about Ben Cardin or me or Mr. Zeese for that matter. It is about each one of you. It is about what you bring to this debate. Your hopes, your dreams, your aspirations, the opportunities that you seek as a small business owner, as a teacher, as a mother, father, is an opportunity for us to have a discussion, not amongst each other, which is the classic Washington style, but more directly with you, to hear from you the things that are important every day in your life. Part of that process is understanding what it means to make a payroll, the impact of taxes, the impact of healthcare, the impact of the war, the impact of the environment, safety in your community, the educational system, on your everyday lives. Our problems, ladies and gentlemen, aren't red or blue, black or white, liberal or conservative. They're real problems. It's not about boxing each other in the halls of Washington. It's about going to Washington and getting something done. I do not want to go to Washington to retire. I want to go to get something done. This is an engagement between us. This is an opportunity for us to lay out the future course of this country as we deal with the challenges of war, recognizing that we live in a world in which our enemy lives amongst us. Recognizing that our public school system, right here in this city and cities across this country, fail to educate, fail to uplift, fail to empower. This is an opportunity to talk about true empowerment, something I know firsthand, because I've lived it, I've experienced it, I've walked that walk. When I tried to reform and did reform our small business enterprise in this state, it was an opportunity to empower small businesses for the first time who had been shut out and told, we'll just put your name on the paper, we just won't give you the check. It was for the first time creating a seat at the table for individuals and families. When I visited over 40 schools over the last year, got on school buses and taught classrooms and listened to teachers and principals about the educational system in this state, it was trying to find the keys to empower these schools to be successful, to empower teachers to teach and principals to run their schools. This is what this election is about. It is about how leadership responds to the needs of the community, not how leadership responds to the call of its party. I've spent a long time walking the walk of this state. Maryland is one big main street that has enormous, enormous opportunities before it. But we have disparities in healthcare, disparities in education, disparities in how we deal with everyday issues. Why are African American men being locked up on our city streets with no cause? Why are our kids, why are our children living in fear in their own neighborhoods? Why the rise in gang violence and gang activities? Let's look at the systemic causes, the root causes, the problems we have in our communities, and together address them. I think a leader is someone who's always prepared to lead but never afraid to follow. As a U.S. Senator, I want to follow you, listen to you, take you with me to Washington. My opponent, one of my opponents at least, has had 20 years of public service. But then when I look at his district, I don't see that translated. At what point, Mr. Cardin, will you begin to pay attention to what's going on in your own backyard before you move to a bigger one? This is what this election is about. This is what this election is about. This is what we're going to stay true to. From my own personal experiences as I've traveled this road of life, I've always found a way to serve and will continue to do so. We can talk about the big issues of the day, and we will this evening. But the reality of life is that at some point we have to pause and understand what those issues are and why we need to respond, why we must act. I think that's an important lesson that I've learned. It's one that I will continue to enforce as I go through this campaign, to listen to you, to pay attention, and to try to make a real difference as your U.S. Senator. I want you to understand not just the policy position, I want you to understand the man. I want you to understand what kind of senator I will be, not just someone who's going to go in the room and can tick off legislation and sign on to a bill and vote, but someone who will constantly be in the community and learning and understanding and taking that experience back to Washington, where they have forgotten how to listen to the people of this community, where they have forgotten how to respond. Your frustration and your angst has a lot to do with the fact that people don't pay attention to you in leadership. And we will do that. We will do that together, working hard to make Maryland a better place. So I thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. And I look forward to a long discussion tonight and over the next 5 years, 5 nights, 5 weeks. 5 weeks from tonight, you will go to the polls and you will make a decision.
Mr. Steele, your time is up.
And I hope you make a good one. Vote for me this November. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we go to our last candidate, do me a big favor. I know most of you are here for a particular candidate. Let's be respectful. Let's listen to what they have to say. Mr. Zeese, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. First, let me thank you all for coming and thank the Urban League for hosting this event and including all 3 candidates. I want to thank Mr. Steele for making sure that we were included in this debate and Mr. Cardin for participating in this historic 3-candidate debate. We have never had a statewide race before with 3 candidates debating each other in Maryland. Let's hope we have more of them so voters have more choices in the elections, that we need to have a new leadership and new direction in this country. I think when you hear what I have to say, you'll see that we can have new leadership and new direction in this country. I've been nominated by 3 parties. That's a historic first also. The Green Party, the Libertarian Party, and the Populist Party. So I actually have more nominations than my challengers combined. As I said, this is the first time that that's ever occurred anywhere in the United States, that even 2 of those parties have agreed on one candidate. I also have Democrats and Republicans and Independents who are on my campaign committee, who volunteer for my campaign, and who donate to my campaign. Why have you all come together? Because this is a critical time in our history. We are going in so many wrong directions at once. In my 51 years, I don't think we've been more off track than we are now. And so we're coming together in unity for change. And I hope that after you hear what we have to say, you'll join us in this effort to make Maryland and the country get back on track in the direction we all want to see it go. I've worked for 30 years in Washington, in Annapolis, in Baltimore, trying to make this country a better place. I currently head an anti-war group called Democracy Rising. You can see about 100 articles I've written about the Iraq War since the war began on that website, democracyrising.us. I've also been a co-founder of Voters for Peace, which is a group that's trying to organize anti-war voters and educate them so they can become the majority they are. We are a majority in this country who oppose unnecessary wars of aggression, not only Iraq, but also not only the Iraq war, but also the talk now about bombing Iran. That would be an even bigger mistake than what we've done in Iraq. I've worked for 3 years in Annapolis with a group that I co-founded called True Vote Maryland to try to bring transparency to our elections. Our democracy, the wheels of our democracy are in serious trouble and need to be reshaped and fixed. We don't have transparent elections in Maryland. We can't be sure with these electronic voting machines that our votes are counted as they're cast. I've been working for a voter-verified paper ballot now for 3 years. We're going to keep working for it until we can get a democracy that we can trust. After graduating from law school at George Washington University in 1980, I took on the issue of the war on drugs. In fact, I was last in this room helping to start a coalition in Maryland of 24 organizations called the Treatment Not Incarceration Coalition. We need that. In fact, it's a desperate need. You know, the United States has 1 out of 4 of the world's prisoners. 25% of the world's prisoners reside in the land of the free. It's a disgrace we have to face up to, and Maryland is among the worst. In fact, it is the worst as far as racially unfair enforcement. 90% of those incarcerated in Maryland are African American, even though there are 7 times as many white drug users and drug dealers. It's obscene. I've learned over my 30 years of experience that we can be right on the issues, we can have the facts on our side, we can even have a majority on our side, and yet we get ignored in Washington because Washington does not listen to the people. It listens to the special interests that fund their campaigns. We need to challenge those special interests, not kowtow to them. This brings me to why I'm running for the U.S. Senate. Senator John McCain, who I don't agree with on many foreign policy issues, describes our electoral system as nothing less than, quote, a massive influence peddling scheme where both parties conspire to sell the country to the highest bidder. And he's right. When I mention John McCain across the state, whether it's a red county or a blue county or libertarians or greens or populists, I get the same reaction. They all know that the elephant in the living room is that our country is being sold to the highest bidder. When you hear this debate tonight, you will understand why we don't have health care for all, because our candidates are taking money from the insurance industry. Why do we pay 3 times as much as pharmaceuticals as other countries around the world for the same drugs? Because of the pharmaceutical industry. Why are we in Iraq? Because of the defense industry, because of the Israeli lobby, because of the oil and gas industry. That's why we're in Iraq. Why do we not face up to global warming? Why don't we face up to global warming despite the urgency of the need? Because of the auto industry, because of the oil industry, because of the developers who love to see us drive our cars in our sprawl. That's why we don't face up to climate change. We need to face up to that urgently. This is a very important election year, folks. This is a very important opportunity for Maryland to really show the country that we are not going to allow the special interests to dominate politics any longer. This is the opportunity. I want you to think of yourselves as historical actors, as people who are important, as people who can make a difference to the direction our country goes. You have a role to play. I want you to play that role with great seriousness. I want you to think of yourself. It's sometimes hard in the present to look and not be afraid of the 2 parties, because the 2 parties play games with us. You know, when my sons were growing up, if they were doing something I didn't want them to do, let's call it C, I would say, don't do C, guys, do A or B. And they thought they had a choice. But there was no real choice in A or B, because I had taken what they wanted to do, which was C, off the table. That's what the 2 parties do to us. They manipulate us. They manipulate us with fear. They manipulate us with fear. The Democrats say if the Republicans get elected, we'll be all fascist country. The Republicans say if the Democrats get elected, all the gays will get married. Marriage will be destroyed. It's all nonsense. It's all exaggeration. So, to make this easier for people to understand and to grasp, particularly in this room with the Underground Railroad history, let's go back to 1850, when the issue of the day was slavery. And the two parties were the Democrats, who were the plantation owners, who refused to address slavery because they were profiting from slavery. The other party was the Whigs. The Whigs were the Northern industrialists who also profited from slavery because slavery was as valuable as every business in the country combined. So everybody was profiting. The two parties were both profiting, and slavery was off the table. Then there were abolition parties. Abolition parties who said, no, it's morally wrong, it's ethically wrong. We cannot have a country with slaves in this country. They said that and they stood up. They stood up and they said, no more, we're going to make this issue an issue in our electoral politics. They got 5% of the vote. They got 7% of the vote. They elected congressmen. They elected senators. They elected governors. And finally, in 1860, they evolved into the Republican Party, and slavery was near its end. Those people who voted for those anti-slavery votes at 5%, they are the heroes of our history. They stood up to the two parties and said, no, we're not going to do it. We're not going to vote for the lesser evil because it's still evil. We're not going to do it. That is where we are today. We are today a country dominated by big business corporations, controlling our government through financing of the campaigns of people from both political parties. We've got to say no more corporate controlled government. We want a government of the people, not of the special interests. And that's what we have to work for, a government of the people. And that's what I'm running for. So when you go to vote, I want you to start to think about that. That you are a historical actor. And you know, the American people are waking up to this realization. Because if you know, a poll a year ago asked the question, do you feel represented by your federal elected official? Only 17% of Americans said yes. 83% of Americans felt unrepresented by their federal elected official. For the first time in our history, both political parties have higher negative ratings than positive ratings. For the first time in our history, as the Republican Party drops in popularity, the Democratic Party is not getting more popular. We're seeing the public saying enough of this corruption, enough of this special interests. It's time for a government of the people. I hope that you soon will understand that the only way that we can get what we want is to vote for what we want. If we continue to vote based on fear and manipulation, we will be afraid, and we will be manipulated. It's time for us to stand up and say no. I hope that on November 7th, after you've seen a series of debates that we'll be having over the next 5 weeks, hope you will see that your best interests, your best representative, will be my campaign and my candidacy. I look for your vote. I look for your support. Thank you all very much for coming.
Gentlemen, as much as it pains me, I'm going to ask you all to take a seat so you don't have to stand during the entire process. This next round of questions will come from both me and Donnie. You will have 3 minutes to answer. The first person to answer the first series of questions will start out with Mr. Cardin, then we'll have Mr. Steele and Mr. Zeese. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have signs in the back, please keep them down. Please keep your comments to a minimum so that we can hear the answers to the questions. With the first question of the night, Donnie, you may go.
Mr. Cardin, here in Baltimore City, we have the worst public school system in the state of Maryland. In Prince George's County, while it is the richest African-American county in the country, it has the second worst public school system in the state of Maryland. Both jurisdictions, as you well know, are predominantly black. Over the past 4 years since we've had a Republican governor, I'm still reminded that for 36 years prior, the Democrats have dominated the State House as well as the Maryland General Assembly. What is the plan? What is the plan to save our public schools, particularly Baltimore City and Prince George's, where it's more likely for a young person to go to prison than to college?
Well, Thank you for that question. I'm going to first respond just very briefly to Mr. Steele. You see, Mr. Steele, Mr. Zeese and I have been together in several debates. You weren't at any of those debates, so we've already had a chance to talk about some of these issues. And let me also just caution people, if I might, my supporters, if you don't applaud, that's fine with us. We'll have more time for questions, and I'd rather have more time for questions. So I would just urge all of us to allow the candidates to respond. I think we all can suffer through no reaction from the public. Let me also mention to Mr. Steele that I've had more town hall meetings in the last several years than you've had in your entire public life. So I've listened to the voters of the 3rd
All due
Congressional
respect,
District.
Congressman, can you answer the question? Public schools, Baltimore City, Prince George's County.
I assume that was not my people responding. Let me just tell you how important I think public education is. I'm a product of the Baltimore City school system. In the Baltimore City school system, I met Myrna. And we've been married now almost 42 years. So I owe a lot to the public school system, and I want to make sure that we give priority to public education. Now, the question is best addressed as to what a United States Senator can do. What we can do at the national level to really make education a national priority. I've introduced legislation that will allow the local school districts to designate their master teachers, put them in our most difficult schools, and get a financial reward for doing it, to help our most difficult schools and to provide educational opportunity. I might point out that the Ehrlich Steele administration has not fully funded Thornton, has made the cost of higher education more costly, and has not made education a state priority. Now, at the national level, I believe we should fully fund No Child Left Behind. I think we should also modify No Child Left Behind. I think No Child Left Behind has left millions of children behind because it's an unfunded mandate on our locals. Mr. Steele thought that No Child Left Behind is adequately funded. I disagree with that. I believe that the federal government needs to fully fund IDEA for children with special needs, and they haven't done that. I've opposed the Bush budget. I think it's more important to fund education than to give tax cuts to those who don't need it, and I voted that way. I voted against tax cuts that have been financed by making education more costly and less available. So I am for the federal government truly making education a national priority by giving the resources to our local school districts so they can reduce class size and they can provide educational opportunity for every child in our community. And by the way, the federal government also has a responsibility to make college education more affordable. It is against national interest for college students to be graduating with such high debt. Many children are not going to schools that they really need to go to because of the cost of higher education. I am going to continue to vote to make public education a national priority and helping those school districts that are most in need.
Mr. Cardin, your time is up. Mr. Steele, do you need the question repeated?
No.
Okay.
When you go to Frederick Douglass High School and you look a 17-year-old young lady in the eye and you ask her if she's ready to graduate in 2 months, and she looks at you and says, no, I'm not. That I will need additional remedial help before I can begin my college education. It says to me that there's something wrong with our system. When you travel from school district to school district and you see the incredible disparities between the school kids who live over here and the school kids who live over there, you know there's something wrong with the system. I spent an academic year in the classrooms of Maryland talking to teachers and principals and students about the quality of education in our state. And what I have found is the congressman is absolutely right. No Child Left Behind, while well funded here in Maryland, is not funded well across the country. And I have called for additional funding for No Child Left Behind, and in fact have said that No Child Left Behind, while a good idea, has been poorly executed. Why? Because it doesn't take into account what teachers do every day. It doesn't educate the whole child. It teaches to a test. And it doesn't make the educational experience real for the teacher, not the child. The child is left behind in that context. So I have called for a re-examination of how No Child Left Behind works before we move further. You have to listen to teachers. They will tell you what they need in the classroom. They will tell you what it takes to move a child from a 3rd grade reading level to a 5th grade reading level. We need to take that time. The school system is struggling here because the bureaucracy has a hold of it. I want the teachers and the principals to take hold of education, not the government, because I trust those teachers to teach and those principals to manage their schools. I've called for additional funding from this administration for Pell Grants and scholarship monies that are important for kids to go to college. You cannot educate yourself if you can't afford to go. You cannot educate your children if you can't afford to send them. So those scholarship dollars are important and they need to be put back in place. We have real challenges in education. And you can't solve nor answer the question in 3 minutes. What it takes is a constant listening and a constant push to make the system work for teachers and students. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steele.
Thank you for the question. It's an important one. I'm also a product of public schools. In fact, my father was a teacher, my grandmother was a teacher, my great-grandfather was a teacher, so I come from a long line of teachers, and I take the public school system very seriously. I think it's important to look at schools in a broader context. We have rising poverty for 5 years in a row. Kids can't learn when they're hungry. That's a reality. We have serious problems with not just in the schools that you mentioned, but the lack of preschool education. We haven't funded preschool education despite the fact that we know it works. We know it works and we don't fund it. No wonder we're falling behind. If we started earlier, these kids will be doing better when they got to the middle schools and elementary schools. And similarly, we have to really face up to the need for not just affordable college education, but free college education. Now, what would that cost? That would cost about $47 billion a year. That's about 6 months of our time in Iraq. That's about half of what we spend to keep our troops in Europe, where they have no enemies, and in Asia, where we have no enemies. Half of what we spend on that each year. It's about 1/6 of what we spend in corporate welfare, over $300 billion a year in corporate welfare. We can provide college education. We can provide free college education to all Americans, and we need to do that. With the globalization of the trade, not just, all jobs are moving across seas. I'm talking about accountants, I'm talking about lawyers. All jobs can move. And therefore, if we can't compete globally, we're in serious trouble, and that's where we're going. And so I think we have to make education a real priority. And when we talk about priorities, if you vote for the Iraq War funding, as my opponent, Mr. Cardin, has done, over and over again, $320 billion worth of funding, and that's not just for our troops. That's also for Halliburton and Bechtel and their rip-offs. That's also for 14 permanent military bases. That's also for the largest embassy in the world, 10 times as big as the typical embassy in Baghdad that we have now, an embassy that will be there as our headquarters to control the Middle East. That's what those budgets are voting for, and we're not voting for what we need, which is at home, taking care of our own people, particularly education.
Thank you, Mr. Zeese. This next round of questions, we're going to reverse the order. So Mr. Zeese, you will be the first, give the first answer. Mr. Cardin will be second. Mr. Steele, you will be third. The question comes from me. All of you are here. All of you are here at this forum because somehow you believe that the African American vote is important, while traditional voting patterns suggest that the Democratic Party has a lock on this constituency. What I hear on the stump is that that might not be the case. Tell me what message a voter is sending voting for you, and conversely, what message are they sending if they aren't voting for you?
Good question. Excellent question. I don't think it just applies to African Americans, but I'll take it from that perspective. Yes, I think that African Americans are making a mistake by being loyal to one party because then your vote's taken for granted. And if your vote's taken for granted, that party can ignore you. If you look at the reality of Maryland, where the African American vote determines who wins the election so often, yet we have 90% of the drug incarcerations are African Americans after decades of Democratic rule. That's how they treat their loyal support. We see education in urban black neighborhoods dropping. We see healthcare dropping. We see AIDS increasing. We see poverty wages. We see median income in Baltimore, one of the lowest in the state. That is what you get for your loyalty. So it's time to think freshly and to start to think, who really should you support? Now, I've worked for years for social justice. I'll tell you one example of something I did that I was involved in that is relevant to the African American community. There was a situation in Tulia, Texas, where in one night, half the town's black men were arrested and charged with cocaine dealing. They searched their homes and found no drugs, no money, and no weapons. They went to trial. The first person went to trial on the basis of one undercover policeman's testimony, got 400 years. The next person was told, you want 400, or we'll give you 20. And about half the men pled guilty, despite them not being guilty of anything. Others went to trial, and all were found guilty. We took 3 years of work. We worked with the NAACP. We worked with a whole range of groups to end that abuse. We got all those people out. That's what it takes. It takes persistence and recognition of injustice.
So what's the message that voters are sending when they vote for you?
When people vote for me, they're voting for change.
So what's the message if they don't vote for you?
If they're voting for either of my candidate opponents, they're voting for the status quo. They're voting for more of the same. They're voting for more of the same that we've been seeing in our country for the last 30 years. More of a direction away from justice, human rights, equal treatment of the law, into further and further rich-poor divide that really is hurting America at its roots. Okay. That's what they're voting for.
Thank you, Mr. Zeese. Mr. Cardin. What do you see as that message, Mr. Cardin, if they're voting for you?
Well, let me say first, I agree with Mr. Zeese in that the voters in the African American community want change. And I think by voting for me, they're going to vote for someone who will bring about change for two reasons. One, it's because of my record, my commitment, what I've stood for my entire life, and where I stand on the issues. They want someone who's going to fight to make education a priority. We talked about our schools in the last question, but change starts with public education in Baltimore City, in Prince George's County, and every county in the state. I'm committed to public education. I'm committed to budgets in Washington that are a different priority than the Bush administration. The budgets in Washington have been based upon number one priority, cut taxes. That's the number one priority. It has not been to look after the people of this country. So I'm a change agent to change the directions. What the voters in the African American community want, I threw out and throughout Maryland, they want to change the agenda setters in Washington. They don't want the same agenda. They don't want the same path.
So what's
and it starts with keeping this United States Senate seat in Maryland.
So what's the message if they vote against you?
I think they vote against is that I have not been successful in articulating the issue. I think that's my responsibility in this campaign, to get my message out, to talk issues. And thank you for holding this forum tonight because you're helping us. We need to know the differences in the candidates. I oppose George Bush tax cuts. And it's not popular voting against tax cuts. And you're going to see some messages coming out from my opponent saying I voted against this and that. I voted against his budget. Because his budget, Bush budget, is leading this nation in the wrong direction. And I can tell you, in the African American community, they know that. They want college education for us. They want investment here in America. They want to make sure that we take care of the people of this nation. And that's more important than rewarding wealthy people who don't need additional tax cuts. So my message in my campaign is to say there's a real difference between Michael Steele and Ben Cardin. There's a real difference between where the Bush Republicans are leading this nation and where we need to go as a country. And the Ben Cardin is going to be an independent voice in the United States Senate to change the direction of this nation, to put the priorities where they should be, to put American families first. There's frustration out there of trying to pay your college bills and your health care bills and your energy bills. And that's what my campaign is about. If I can get that message across, I'm not only going to win in the African American community, I'm going to win throughout Maryland.
Thank you very much. Mr. Steele. Mr. Steele, what's the message that your campaign is sending, or what is the message that you think people, when they come up to the polls, when they go into the booth?
I think they're looking for how leadership will lead, how leadership will make a difference in their lives, but I think they're also looking for how they will themselves be empowered, how they will be able to grab a hold of opportunity. Today was a good day for the African American entrepreneur because we set a new level in the market. Dollars are flowing, capital is available. For the first time in a long time, people can reach out and grab a hold to the resources they need to grow their businesses. Last time I checked, I don't find people running around saying, I want to be poor. People want to be helped, they want to be empowered, they want opportunity. And I think what I stand for is an example of what that empowerment can do, and how in some small way, like Thurgood Marshall said, to be able to not only lift yourself up by your own bootstraps, but then to reach back and help someone else. That's what leaders do every day. So this message for me, when you vote for me, you're voting for an opportunity for empowerment. I appreciate your definition of change, Congressman Cardin, but quite frankly, it's an outdated message on change.
So what's the message
level of change?
So Mr. Steele, what's the message that voters are sending if they don't vote for you?
If they don't vote for me, that's same old in my view. That's an opportunity to say, this is a shoe that fits well. This is an opportunity that fits well for me. I'm out there pushing the envelope. And if you don't want the envelope pushed, then fine. I mean, I say for a reason. If you want change, vote for me. If you don't, if you like the way things are, if you like the fact that the leadership of this country is not paying attention to your needs and not focusing on the things that are important on Park Heights, Capitol Heights, and places all across this state, then I'm not your man. But I'm going to stand for the people of Maryland. I'm not standing with party. I'm not standing against party. My opponent, Mr. Cardin, talks about he wants to be a change agent. How can you be a change agent when you vote 95% with your own party? How can you be a change agent if you're not willing to take that risk and offend the leadership of your party? How are you going to be a change agent if you're not prepared to look the voter in the eye and say, I did this for you, not for drug companies, not for insurance agents, but for the people of this state? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We have a number of businesses here in the city of Baltimore, Prince George's County, throughout the state of Maryland that are black businesses. 4 years ago, you came with the governor with a 14-point memorandum of understanding, the ladder to opportunity. One of those items highlighted was black business. If you were to go to the U.S. Senate, how do you plan to expand business opportunities for black business people?
Well, let me begin by saying that I have made it very clear that, and I've heard many times from many around the country and the administration and beyond, that small business entrepreneurs are the backbone of our country. Well, how can you say that on the one hand and then cut the budget of the Small Business Administration on the other? The reality of it is small business owners, particularly in this state where we have over 200,000 small business owners, the majority of whom are minority owned, employing some 52% of our workforce in this state, making up 97% of all the businesses in Maryland. How can you turn your back on the legacy wealth that they create every day when they hire someone, when they expand their business, when they push the envelope just a little bit? For me, as Lieutenant Governor, I spent the time to focus in and zero in on what small businesses need. They needed capital, they needed resources, they needed a guiding hand. I created a mentor-protege program for all small businesses in the state to marry them up with larger corporations who can teach them the basics and the fundamentals of running and growing a business. I created a reserve pool for small business owners that now, as we speak, has $365 million in it for small and minority businesses in this state. For them only, no other players but them. We have begun to change the dynamic and the relationship between small business and government. We need to take that and move it to the federal level, where we streamline the process. If you're an 8A certified company, why do you have to jump through hoops at the state level? And if the state recognizes your small business as a minority-owned business, why not streamline that process at the federal level? Why do we create obstacles to ownership instead of breeding an opportunity for them to grow and expand? So I'm looking at finding ways in which we can help small businesses take advantage of what federal contracts and federal opportunities have, the same as I've done at the state level, focusing on not just having a seat at the table, not just having a seat at the lunch counter, but owning the diner, This is an ownership generation. This is a generation that is going to hire my 18-year-old son. This is the generation that's going to lay down the pathway to opportunities for greater earning power. And you have to create and streamline a process and a partnership between the states and the federal government so that those small business owners don't get trapped, they don't get forgotten. And that's what I intend to take with me and more when I go to the United States Senate in November.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Zeese?
Thank you very much. I agree very much with Lieutenant Governor's comments on the importance of small business. And I also believe that we really need to have an ownership society, a real ownership society. We don't have that. You know, 100 years ago, 90% of Americans were in some kind of business of their own. Now it's only 10%. We've gone through a major transition the last 100 years. The next 100 years, we will see our GDP, our gross domestic product, quadruple in size. If we don't put in place now economic policies that ensure that that wealth is shared equitably, we're going to see the continuation of what we see right now, which is money funneling to the top. The top 1% of the wealth in this nation has the same power and wealth as the bottom 95% combined. Top 1% is the same as the 95% combined. We need to change that, and I have a few plans to change that. The first thing is, I favor a restructuring of our tax programs. We tax investment more and workers less. The first $100,000 of income should be federal income tax free. I would replace that with a tax, a tiny tax of 0.1% on Wall Street investments, and that would raise 3 times as much money as we raise from taxing the first $100,000 income, because we've skewed our economy so much by sending money to the top. We can change that and really make a big difference. A 22% raise for all Americans will do a great deal for small businesses. It will energize the economy. The second most important thing to help business is to deal with health care. And we can't deal with health care the way that Mr. Cardin suggests. We cannot build on this failed system of private insurance companies. We must challenge the private insurance companies, have a national health care plan, a single-payer system. That is the only way. That is the only way that any country has provided health care for all. But that requires challenging the special interests. That's why we don't have health care for all. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about changing corporate welfare. We are right now giving over $300 billion of working people's money to the massive national and international corporations, warping the market so that we no longer have a fair market. I want to change that so that if we are going to invest our tax dollars in corporations, that we get a percentage of that profit. I want to do that based on the Alaska Permanent Trust model to create a national permanent trust, so that a small percentage of the profit from companies we invest in goes into a permanent trust, and that's shared with all Americans. That could mean every American getting thousands of dollars every year to invest in a business so we can have a nation of entrepreneurs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Zeese.
Mr. Steele said that what we need to do is increase the funding for our minority business programs. He also said we need to increase No Child Left Behind. I agree. The problem is, how do you pay for it? You've got to change budget priorities in Washington if you're going to be able to help minority businesses here. And that means you can't support these tax cuts that the Bush administration has brought forward. Mr. Steele supports them. That's been the major issue in the budget. The loss of revenue from these tax cuts. Number 2, you've got to change policy in Iraq. We can't continue to spend the type of money we're spending in Iraq. Mr. Steele supports that. And number 3, you've got to take on the insurance crisis that we have in America. You've got to take on the insurance companies as I have. You've got to take on the drug companies as I have. You've got to save money in our healthcare system. And Mr. Steele is not doing that. So my point is this: yes, we need to redirect priorities and help minority businesses. But it starts with different priorities in Washington on the budget. And Mr. Steele's been silent or in favor of the Bush budgets in that regard. Now, I have worked with individual companies, individual minority companies, to get the right type of contracts from the federal programs. I'm tired of these numbers being satisfied by subcontractors. I want primary contracts. And I've worked with the Defense Department so that we can get primary contracts. So small businesses, minority businesses, are not forced to sell their copyrights to the big giants in order to be able to get any business. I want to see equity with minority business as well as jobs. I want them part of the wealth of America. And that's what you need to concentrate on. Number two, we got great opportunity now in this state. Brackett's going to bring in tens of thousands of new opportunities here in Maryland. The transportation bill is going to bring in new opportunities. I have been effective in government facilities in the 3rd Congressional District, and I will in the state of Maryland, and I want those facilities located in the communities in which minority businesses can best be served. I know I'm here in Baltimore, but I tell you, Prince George's County needs to be a priority for the location of federal facilities and leased facilities, and I support that, bringing in more opportunity so minority businesses can get the benefits of these programs. That's what I have fought for as a congressman, and that's what I will fight for as your United States Senator. I know how to get the job done. I've done it. I know how to make programs work, and I will make them work, and we've got to do a better job to help minority businesses here in Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Cardin. Next round of questions. We'll start with you, Mr. Cardin. I want to shift gears just a little bit. I want to talk about a poll conducted by a program on international policy attitudes, a group from the University of Maryland. They questioned Iraqis about their attitudes towards U.S. troops, and nearly 3/4 of them believe their presence is provoking more conflict than preventing violence. Without going into what went wrong about this conflict, put forth a plan that will either allow American forces to withdraw or paint a picture of how we stabilize the situation, where by all accounts is going very badly.
Thank you for asking that question, because I think that's a fundamental question we all need to be able to answer. And yes, you're right. I could very quickly say I voted against the war 4 years ago. I've been opposed to the president's management of the war throughout the last 4 years, and I've been a spokesperson against the management of the war. We never should have. We should have engaged the international.
That's the past. Let's get to the present.
Let's get to the present. I don't want to lose that, because this administration has made it much more difficult for us to have a satisfactory solution. And we have to understand that. We're in the middle of a civil war. We're in the middle of a civil war. It's not going to be pretty. And we are making it more difficult by staying the course. So I've come out with a full plan. My plan says we start redeploying troops immediately at the levels in which our military says is necessary without announcing a specific time schedule for the withdrawal of troops. Let me repeat that one more time so Mr. Steele hears it. Without announcing a specific time schedule for the reduction of troops, will we start a systematic reduction of American troops and allow the Iraqis to stand up and take responsibility for the defense of their own country? That we engage the international community, as we did in Bosnia and Kosovo, to train the Iraqi security forces. They're much more effective than we are in training security forces. So use the international community that's prepared to help us if we only asked, to help train the Iraqi security forces. Convene an international conference with the Iraqis participating to negotiate a ceasefire with the militia, which is what we need to do. Use NGOs, non-governmental organizations, to deliver the infrastructure improvements in Iraq and humanitarian assistance, and we won't get into the inefficiencies of the current way in which we're using U.S. taxpayer dollars almost exclusively to try to help rebuild Iraq, and we're doing a very poor job at that. I've been to Iraq. I've seen firsthand what's going on there, and our policy is not working. And I do want us to have an outcome that's the best possible outcome for U.S. interest in Iraq. And we need to implement a new policy, because the turn policy is not working. It may very well be helping us train, helping us have more terrorists that are vulnerable to the United States. It may very well be in the middle of a civil war. We need to recognize this issue, and we need to develop policies that are in the U.S. interest. And I have put forward a full plan on it, and I'm really interested in listening to my other colleagues on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Steele.
One of the greatest challenges of our time is how to conduct a war and how to win the peace. And the challenges of this conflict are no less different. The Iraqi situation presents the United States with a unique opportunity and an enormous challenge, and what we need to do is to make sure that we are there to finish the job. We need to put in place a strategy to win. We need to put in place a strategy that will take advantage of the opportunities to empower the Iraqi people.
So you're looking to stabilize what's going on there?
As opposed to withdraw, yes. Okay. This is not the time to step back. This is not the time to redeploy. This is the time to focus and be disciplined in getting on the ground the resources that the troops need, that the Iraqi people need, but most importantly, the Iraqi government. You would admit that things are going badly there, right? Let me finish.
But you would admit that things are going badly there, right?
Answer your question.
Okay.
Okay. The challenge that we have right now in Iraq is to make sure we put in place a strategy that will allow the Iraqi government to run and control its military, its police, and to empower the people to control its own form of government, which they've chosen 3 times, they voted for 3 times. We do have challenges there. We are fighting a conventional warfare against insurgents. We need to shift our tactics. We need to change the dynamics of this campaign to engage the enemy in the proper manner. This is not the time to step back. This is not the time to lay out a timetable. This is not the time to draw down 10,000 troops a month. This is the time to make sure that we put in place the benchmarks, the strategy that will show the American people and the Iraqi people that the progress is being made. Just 3.5 weeks ago, the Iraqi government took control of its military, a significant step. But we still have before us many other challenges that we have to face. This is not easy. Democracy is not an easy thing to create or to help move along.
Help me here, Mr. Steele. Yep. Are things going badly in Iraq?
In what respect? In terms of military? Or
no, are things going badly? I'm talking about
in terms of the military, or in terms of the military, or in terms of the fact that schools and roads are being built.
Let's talk about
the society itself.
Your overall perception of what's going on in Iraq. Is it going good or bad?
It's not going well. No, it's not.
Okay,
There's fair challenges. No, there's not going well, and this is my point. It's not going well because we're engaged in a strategy that is using conventional methods against insurgents. We need to put in place a strategy that takes into account what we're dealing with on the ground. And that's what I want to work with the administration, work with Congressman Cardin's colleagues and others when I get to the Senate. We can sit here and jump back and forth all day on this issue. The bottom line is we have a lot of challenges that have to be put on the table. The administration has to put on the table its direction, its focus, and what it is we should be using as a benchmark of success.
I'm sorry about that. Mr. Zeese.
I disagree with both my colleagues on this question.
Ladies and gentlemen, please hold your applause. Please hold your applause. Mr. Zeese.
It is time for us to announce an immediate withdrawal from Iraq of both our military and corporations. And of our corporations. We have to give Iraq back to the Iraqis. That's the only way to bring stability to the country. If we announce a withdrawal, we can complete it in 4 to 6 months in a responsible and rapid way. And we can only do this because this is the only way to bring stability. We cannot bring stability to Iraq. We invaded on false pretenses. We got caught in a
prison. That's the past. Talk about the future.
No, this is the future. This is about the future because you have to understand we cannot bring stability to Iraq with the Abu Ghraib prison scandal, with the killing of civilians at Haditha, with the bombing of Fallujah.
Get to the present.
A city the size of Baltimore. We cannot bring stability. We can only bring instability. By announcing a withdrawal, the Main Street Iraqis will no longer be part of the insurgency. They'll know they're getting the country back, and that will bring more stability. Further, this is not just my view. You know, Bob Woodward has a book that just came out. One thing that's not been mentioned in that book that is, I think, a really important piece of information is General John Abazi, the current head of our forces in Iraq, has contacted John Murtha and told him he agrees with John Murtha. We need to get out immediately. The head of our command is telling John Murtha that. And other generals are saying the same thing. Everything that we fear is made more likely by our staying. Whether it's terrorism, whether it's instability, whether it's civil war, whether it's theocracy, whether it's loss of control of the oil, it's all made more likely by our staying. Now, Mr. Cardin is saying a lot of things in his rhetoric now that sound good, but look at his record. He has voted yes first on he voted right on the first vote, but he's had 14 wrong votes since then. 14 wrong votes since then. He's voting against every call for an exit strategy. He's voted in favor of staying the course, and he's voted for over $300 billion in money. How can you be in favor of withdrawal and vote for permanent bases? How can you be in favor of withdrawal? How can you be in favor of withdrawal and vote for the biggest embassy in the world? 10 times as big as our typical embassy, the size of 8 football fields. It dominates the Baghdad skyline. No wonder the Iraqis think we're staying. We're building a gigantic embassy that's going to dominate the Middle East. We have to face up to this issue and get out quickly and not make the problem worse by bombing Iran and no longer support Israel when it kills civilians in Lebanon. That's unacceptable for the American way.
The questions will be directed directly to you. Some of these questions will be coming from the audience, which we have here. Donnie, you want to begin?
Congressman Cardin, it is not popular, or it is not a popular part of conversation for people to discuss Israel. As a matter of fact, to mention it is sometimes taboo, even here in Baltimore and the state of Maryland. The fact of the matter is this country puts a predominant amount of money, resources in protecting Israel for such numerically a small number of people. My only challenge with that is when I look around the United States and I look at the tens of millions of black people, I look at Katrina, where black people, mostly, many, could not be rescued, but yet I look at Lebanon and I see people gone in 3 days. What is your stance on the Israeli lobby, here the Israeli lobby, here in the United States, as it relates to the protection of Israel in the midst of a hostile Middle East?
Well, I'm judged by what's in the best interest of the United States. And the United States has an interest in the Middle East, has a vital interest in the Middle East. Unfortunately, we don't have energy independence. If we had energy independence, we would not be so dependent upon policy in the Middle East. We need the Saudis' oil. Saudis' policies aren't very good to the United States. They very well have been involved in harboring and training terrorists that attacked our country on 9/11. But we need their oil. We went to Kuwait in the 1990s because of oil. We didn't go there. We went to Iraq because of oil, not because of the invasion of Kuwait. So oil is dominating our Middle East policies. Israel is a country that's vital to U.S. interest. Vital to U.S. interest. It's the only country in the Middle East that shares our values. And it has some of the same problems that we have.
What are those values? I'm a little confused when I look at Katrina. When I look at half of the population of prisons around, prison population around the country of black men. When I look at black public schools in Baltimore and Prince George, what are our values?
Right. I hope that I get the extra time from.
Sure, sure. Take your time.
Yeah, no, the values on Katrina, you and I are in total agreement. Katrina represented colossal failure by our government. We didn't properly protect people. We left people vulnerable. It just shows when government doesn't accept its moral challenge, people get hurt. People depend on government. So I'm with you on Katrina, 100%. Israel's vulnerability to terrorism is similar to the United States. There are people who want to knock Israel off the face of the earth, and the same people want to knock the United States off the face of the earth. Israel and the United States shares intelligence information. Israel and the United States work on many mutual beneficial areas for both Israel and the United States. It's in the United States' interests that we have a secure Israel, but it's also in our interest to negotiate peace in the Middle East. And we were moving along on that path. I'm for peace in the Middle East. I think that's in our U.S. interest. Not in the interest of any one country in the Middle East, but in the United States' interest.
Well, let me take it a step further. Being of African descent, and I look around this room, there are a lot of people who are, what is your policy toward Africa? Some 53 nations, a lot of potential for resources. Nigeria has oil. China's calling 42 African heads of state to see who Gentile in November. What is the value system and connection, the business relationship, blah, blah, blah.
I am the senior Democrat on trade. I am strongly in support of the expansion of AGOA, which is the free trade or the trade preferences between the continent of Africa and the United States. I am committed. I think Maryland can hold a key part of expansion of economic opportunity between Africa and the United States. I think Prince George's County can hold real promise for economic activities between the United States and Prince George's County and Maryland and the whole African continent. It has been very much underutilized. Our bias in international trade has been with Europe. We need to get much more engaged in Africa and Asia. They're going to be where the future of America is. Africa is very much underutilized, and we need to do something about it. And while we're talking about it, we need to stop the genocide in the Sudan, in Darfur. We need to do that. We cannot let the country just sit back and say no truth. We've got to stop it.
But we also have genocide right here on the streets of Baltimore.
This is the first time. I'm with you. But this is the first time.
I have terrorists selling heroin, cocaine, and crack on my corners every day, but they can find Saddam Hussein in a hole in the ground.
Again,
that's terrorism.
As long as I get my 30 seconds up fine. You're not going to get any argument with me. I want to change the priorities in Washington so we address the issues of drug addiction, so we address the issues of prevention, so we have tutoring programs for our children, we have after-school programs, so we deal with our children. That takes a different budget, a different set of priorities, and somebody is going to fight George Bush's budget, and I'm the one to do it. Now, on the Darfur, it's the first time in history we've declared a genocide and it's still taking place. Not on our watch. We've got to stop it. And we can't let any country say that we're not going to stop the genocide that's taking place in Darfur.
Mr. Cardin, I'm going to have to call time because we could go on and on.
Thank you.
Mr. Steele, will you step to the podium, please? I have two questions here, and they're kind of the same, and it relates to outsourcing. One, it comes from, where's Rhonda and Mary McCart? Will you please raise your hand, Rhonda, so we know these are real people in the audience? Another one comes from Ann Emery. The one question is it good policy to outsource jobs? And the other part of that is, what will you do to curtail outsourcing of employment to India and other third world countries?
That's a very, very important question, particularly as you look at the other issues that are touching this community, where you have any number of people on any given day in search of work. We need to actively engage the American business community, particularly the small business community, to get more active in job training, get more active in creating those avenues for small businesses to bring into business, to bring into their companies individuals who are looking for a better way, a better life. The challenge we face in this economy is the globalization that is occurring around us. As you look at the development of markets, not just here within the country, but outside our borders. And we talked about Africa, and when I did my trade mission to Africa 2 years ago, taking 40 Maryland businesses to build a bridge between Africa and Maryland, so that Maryland businesses who are thriving and growing can go there and teach job training and teach the skills they need to develop their economy eternally, and also bringing to Maryland those entrepreneurs and those businesses who will employ Marylanders, quite frankly. That type of relationship is an ongoing relationship, and it presents our country and our state with some very unique challenges. We have seen small businesses create over the last 3 years 100,000 new jobs in this economy. The question is, what kind of jobs? They're high-paying jobs, they're technical jobs, they're jobs that run the gamut throughout our community, but we also have still among us those who are not employed. And so we need to focus on the job training here at home. We don't necessarily need to look abroad first. We should be looking here, closer in, to see the young person who's coming out of high school or coming out of college looking for that first job, looking for that unique opportunity to establish their own Maryland dream for themselves. So part of what I want to talk about and push in the United States Congress are policies that look to not just bring small businesses to the table, but to do so in a manner that will help them create a legacy of opportunity for jobs, for young people, and for those who go through a change of life, they retire and they want to go back to work, or those who want to do something else after a career. We have it within our means in this country to do that. We don't need to look abroad first. We should be looking a little bit closer here because we got the talent, we got the people. We just need to engage them more creatively through education and job training.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Zeese, the next question is going to come here. If I'm not mistaken, Mr. Zeese, you had talked about withdrawal, immediate withdrawal. This question is from David Havelka. David, are you right? Hey, David. He asked, and this is related to Iraq. President Bush talks about the terrible cost of withdrawing from Iraq. Can you please discuss how costly it would be to stay the course and the benefits to America if we leave?
I think that there are many benefits to us leaving, not just to ourselves, but to the Middle East and to the Iraqis in particular. But as far as to ourselves go, I think if you look at the issue of insecurity of the terrorism issue in the United States, we are creating more enemies faster than we're capturing and killing them. That is what our Iraqi policy is doing, creating more enemies faster than we're capturing and killing them. So getting out of Iraq will help to stabilize that problem. It will also help with economic investment at home. We've spent $320 billion. We're spending $6.8 billion per month now on Iraq. That is money we need at home for a whole range of issues, whether it's health care, whether it's education, whether it's housing, on issue after issue, we need those resources at home. So I think getting out of Iraq is the sensible thing to do to regain our stature in the world, to face up to the mistakes that we made, to be honest with the world that we did make a mistake going in there, and we need to get out there as quickly and responsibly as possible. We don't get out now in a responsible way, we're going to see another Vietnam exit. It's going to drag on for years. There'll be tens of thousands of American deaths, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi deaths, and we'll see the last person hanging out of the helicopter getting out in an irresponsible, chaotic way.
Well, if we pull right out, what's going to happen?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear what you applause.
Immediate withdrawal, what happens? It seems to me cats away the mice will play.
It has the best chance of reducing the violence in Iraq. Because if we withdraw and tell the Iraqis they're getting the country back, it undermines the insurgency. And I think this is not just about Iraq, it's about the Middle East. We need to face up to the reality of breaking our addiction to oil. I agree with Representative Cardin on that question. If we break our addiction to oil, not just oil from abroad, but also oil from the United States, we need to move to a clean, sustainable energy future. That is the solution to dealing with the Middle East. And we certainly have to do two other things in the Middle East. First off, let's not expand the conflict by going into Iran. We need to take the bombing of Iran off the table right now. Right now. And second, we need to reevaluate our relationship with Israel. We need to see peace between Israel and Palestine. We need to see a two-state successful solution. We're not going to see that in the current circumstances. We are providing Israel with 20% of its military budget. We're providing Israel with more money. A country the size of New Jersey with more money than all of sub-Saharan Africa, all of Latin America, all of the Caribbean combined. That is not a sensible priority. And our alliance with Israel, rapidly sending those cluster bombs, so Israel could send 500,000 cluster bombs onto Lebanon in the last 72 hours when they knew there was going to be a ceasefire. Three people a day are dying now because of those cluster bombs. That is a made in America message to the Arab world, making us less secure and making the region less stable.
Thank you, Mr. Zeese. Mr. Cardin, the question's going to come here. Mr. Cardin, you've rallied against special interest money influencing the political process, but you have taken corporate impact money. How should the voters view your stances on the issues of the day, and does it influence your votes?
Well, I ask to be judged on my record. Look at what I have done and what I've stood up for. I have stood up against the drug companies, against the oil companies, against the insurance companies. And I've stood up on the side of consumers. Just take a look at my prescription drug bill, which allows us to negotiate fair price with the prescription drug companies. So we're not
taking money from them too.
Okay, let me answer that question.
Okay.
I say first, look at my record. Look at what I've stood for, not just in the last year, look what I've stood throughout my career. So let's talk specific issues. Where is your concern? Let's talk specific issues. Number two, I'm going to agree that we need campaign finance reform. I agree with Mr. Zeese. I have support of public financing of campaigns. I am for changing the way in which we raise money. And let me just, if I might, comment about Mr. Steele here just for one moment, because he has used the media to comment about me. He has raised he has raised corporate money and special interest money at a 4 times faster pace than I have. So my point is this. My point is this. I want you to judge Mr. Steele based upon the issues, based upon how he's going to vote on matters affecting prescription drugs in this country. How is he going to vote on insurance company issues? How is he going to vote on utilities? How is he going to vote on an energy policy as it relates to the oil interests? You already have my votes. You know where they are. I voted against George Bush's energy policy. Voted against it. I voted to require insurance companies to cover emergency visits under their insurance that they didn't want to do. I have voted against the prescription drug bill that was written by special interest. So judge me on my record. Mr. Steele's right. You've got a lot of years to look at. I am proud of my record of standing up for the people of Maryland. That's my interest, the people of Maryland. And yes, I would much rather be with my colleagues out campaigning on the streets at the festivals than having to raise money in this campaign. I'd much rather do that. So yes, we need to fundamentally change the way that we finance campaigns in America. We need a fundamental change. I have voted for that in Congress, and I'll continue to work with Democrats and Republicans, because I think both parties, we have leaders who are prepared to say, no, let's change the system, and we need to do it. So that's what we need to do in this country. So I'm going to fight for campaign finance reform, but judge me on my record. Judge me on my votes. Judge me who I've stood up for. I've stood up for the consumers, and I've stood against special interests.
Thank you, Mr. Cardin. Mr. Steele?
I'm not going to ask you whether or not you would have nominated Alito. I'm not going to ask you whether or not Congress has held Bush accountable. I'm not going to ask you what kind of judicial nominations you will make, because we simply don't have enough time. I'm going to ask you what the people on the street ask me all the time.
Sure.
And you know, we're in Baltimore, heavily Democratic town.
Yep.
And I mentioned Michael Steele's name to them. They said, well, where was he back in the 60s when we were throwing bombs and rioting? And where was he with the LA riots? We want to bring it up to speed. 2006.
Well, and I was about 10. I may look a little older than I am. It's the hair. I know that. But at that time, I was around 10. But I would have been there.
There are certain black Republicans that we think of all the time.
Yeah.
And they get categorized,
yes, they
as
do.
you well know.
Yep.
We think of Clarence Thomas. We're like, oh, Lord, he's not going to be another Clarence Thomas. Who is the real Michael Steele? You say you're not like
the real Michael Steele is someone. The real Michael Steele is someone who was raised to think for himself. Someone who, while a member of the Republican Party for a long time, have taken my party to task and have held it accountable for its treatment of and its ignoring of my community over the last 40 years. Michael Steele is someone who has been called everything but a child of God in this game of politics, and yet continues to fight for the people that I love and believe in, despite party. On the day that I was inaugurated as Lieutenant Governor of the state, it would happen to be Martin Luther King's birthday. And I stood there and I held my hand up and I swore the oath of office not to represent the interests of Republicans, not to represent the interests solely of African Americans, but to represent the interests of the people of this state, because that's what leadership does. It realizes where politics and name-calling and fear-mongering stops and where leadership begins. I don't need to disparage this fine congressman here. I don't need to disparage this fine congressman here. I don't need members of my campaign staff to disparage this fine congressman here, because that's not what this is about. This is about the kind of leadership that recognizes the value of individuals, the power of the individual. That's what Michael Steele is about. Now, in case everyone doesn't know, because Mr. Cardin insists that I tell you, I will tell you for the record, I am 6'4", I am bald, I'm African American, I'm Catholic, and I'm a very proud Republican. However, that does not change how I look at the issues. What it does is it empowers me to look fairly across party lines and to realize that it's not the color of my skin, it's not my party affiliation, but what I can do to lift people up and to provide an opportunity for them to realize who they are and what their goals and their dreams are. I'm tired of the name calling. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of it from the Democrats. I'm tired when the leaders call me an Uncle Tom, when they call me these kinds of names in public and think that they can get away with it. It doesn't disparage me. It says more about them than it does about me. So as we go through the remaining days of this campaign, I asked Chuck Schumer, I asked Terry Lehrman, I asked Howard Dean, and I asked Ben Cardin to stop the noise, stop the race baiting, stop the fear mongering, and deal with me as a man. Deal with me on the issues that I stand for, not try to make my community hate me because I have a different opinion from you.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Zeese. Mr. Zeese, on your website, you have a glowing article from my good friend R.B. Jones, who endorses your candidacy.
Right.
But it will come as no surprise to you that people say a vote for Kevin Zeese is literally throwing away a vote. And looking at the lineup of the Green candidates, I note that there are few people of color on the ticket. Because of this, make a case for African Americans, why they should dump the traditional parties in favor of Green.
Well, at the top of our ticket actually is an African American running for governor. His name is Ed Boyd, and it's a shame that he's not being included in the debates along with Chris Driscoll of the Populist Party, because we do need more open debates, and I appreciate this opportunity. As far as the throwing away your vote, the only vote you throw away is a vote you throw away on someone you don't agree with. That is the throwing away your vote. When you throw away based on party, or based on your family's history, or based on not knowing the candidate, that is throwing away your vote. Ben Cardin suggests look at his record. I agree with him. Look at his record. We think it's so interesting, it's on our website, ZeeseForSenate.org. So I hope you check it out and see what he stands for, because I think his rhetoric's a lot better than his record is. So please check it out on our website. And I do appreciate R.B. Jones' support, because he put aside color of skin and went for the candidate who was the best candidate. And I think that's what Marylanders should do. What we have here is a three-way race. A three-way race. In a three-way race in our political system, you win with a plurality vote. Jesse Ventura won with 38% of the vote. Bill Clinton won a three-way race with 42% of the vote. You can win with as little as 36% of the vote in a three-way race, and that is what we're in. Now, in the most recent three-way race in Maryland, we had a comptroller's race in the most recent primary. Peter Franchot won a three-way race with 37% of the vote. He was at 11% in the polls 3 weeks before that vote, and he won that election. So don't go by the polls. The way you're going to get what you want is to vote for what you want. Do you want health care for all? Do you want health care for all? There's only one candidate advocating the way to do that, a single-payer system. Do you want to get out of Iraq? There's only one candidate with a real plan to get out of Iraq rapidly and responsibly. Someone who's felt that way throughout this wrap this up. Do you want to see end of corporate control of government? There's only one candidate who's not taking money from special interests. Maryland has a tremendous opportunity to change the direction of this country, to change the course of history. We know our country's on the wrong track. We know that neither of the two status quo parties will fundamentally change the direction of our country. It's time for change. It's time to vote for candidates you believe in. Thank you all very much.
Gentlemen, we have come to the last round of questions, and then we will go to your closing statements. The next question comes for... Who are we going to? Cardin. Sorry, it gets a little confusing here.
These three orations are complicated.
I always seem to get questions from you. It's good.
No problem. I hope you'll be able to answer this one. Today, North Korea vowed to go ahead with the test of a nuclear bomb, at the same time saying that it would not strike first. I don't think it's too far-fetched to think or to consider at some point during your term, if you're elected, a president may ask you to take a vote on using America's nuclear arsenal. Walk us through some of your thoughts if you have to cast that type of vote.
Well, I'm not, let me talk about North Korea first, since you raised it. North Korea is a dangerous country. However, North Korea is a country that we should be able to use diplomacy to resolve their development of nuclear weapons. North Korea is a very poor country that needs help from the international community. We should be able to work with the international community to remove the threat to North Korea. My complaint with the Bush administration is that they don't understand that international affairs include diplomacy. They don't seem to really work diplomacy. And I think we need to do that. Use of nuclear weapons would be catastrophic. And we
But you agree that is a possibility, isn't it?
I think the use of nuclear weapons is such an extreme use that I don't believe it's a viable option to use nuclear weapons in a country against, like, North Korea. No, I don't think that's a viable option.
But you can, as I hear the rhetoric coming from up on Pennsylvania Avenue, not going down here.
Look, this president, I'm going to confess, doesn't consult with me before he makes decisions of going to war. I will tell you this. The problem is he doesn't consult with a lot of people before he makes decisions. And my concern is that we need a different foreign policy. We need a foreign policy where we engage the international community. We don't go that far back. Just go back 6 years ago, where the United States' influence internationally was to move forward with peace and security around the globe. We need to go back to that type of foreign policy. Then, yes, you isolate the North Koreas of the world, and you negotiate with the North Koreans to end their nuclear program. Because North Korea is bordered to South Korea, and the economic progress in South Korea is going to bring down North Korea. They know they need to integrate their economy, so we work with them to bring them into the rest of the countries. That's what diplomacy is about. That's what international... We have so many weapons in our arsenal. And I'm not talking about military weapons. I'm talking about economic weapons. I'm talking about diplomacy and respect and bringing a nation into the modern world. I'm talking about trade. I'm talking about so many things that we can do to spread the influence of peace around the world and security around the world. And we're not doing that today. North Korea we should be able to solve that problem. We should be able to solve the problems in so many other parts of the world. We moved forward where we thought we never could in Northern Ireland, in Cyprus. We never thought we could move forward in peace in those areas, and we did. So let's engage the international community the way we should. Let America, the only superpower that remains, is both a military and economic superpower. Let's use that for good internationally. We're not doing that today.
Thank you, Mr. Cardin. We're going to make a minor change, Mr. Steele. I'm going to get the last question to you, but Mr. Zeese, Donnie has a question for you.
Yes.
Mr. Zeese, Congressman Cardin alluded earlier to our values as Americans. I don't know if you've done any travel abroad, but Quite often when I go, it feels like I should keep my mouth shut so no one can realize that I'm American, because we're so considered bullies across the world. If you were to go to the U.S. Senate, you would be in what's considered an elite club. What are our values as Americans? That's the question.
It's a great question. It's a great question. I have the same feeling when we travel outside the United States that sadly our country is being looked at more and more in a negative light because of our various policies that both parties have pursued. You have to remember, Jimmy Carter started the Carter Doctrine that said we can use military force to keep our access to oil. Bill Clinton is the one who said we can remove Saddam Hussein as our national policy. So this is a bipartisan foreign policy. It's a foreign policy that explains the question of why they hate us. I don't like the phrase of that question, but that's the question that we are being asked to think about after 9/11. And the reason why they hate us is because our foreign policy has been abusive for years. It's abusive not just with our military power, but with our economic power. The so-called free trade agreements that Mr. Cardin has been a supporter of actually are not free trade agreements. They are corporate trade agreements that give more power to corporations and take power away from workers. That is why we see immigration running out of control, because NAFTA, for example, has pushed farmers off their farms in Mexico. So our values are being skewed. My preference for our values are values of a liberal democracy that favors individual rights and limited government, that only uses military force as a last resort, that favors diplomacy and negotiation and not shock and awe, that instead of threatening countries with economic, political, and military power, will work with countries in a multi-country fashion in order to achieve common objectives. That's my value.
That's a great answer, but can you bring that home to the domestic level, especially considering this very building that we're in the basement? There's a little passage where the Underground Railroad once was, and when you think of the history of this nation, most African Americans came in the hull of slave ships. So I'm still trying to find out the values, because what I see is we get it the old-fashioned way, like Smith and Barney. We steal it.
Well, there's a lot of truth in that, sadly, and I think our values are not being seen very well these days domestically either. What we're seeing is rising poverty for 5 years in a row. We're seeing record prison populations. We're seeing the rich-poor divide expand. We're seeing median family incomes remain stagnant. We're seeing 1 out of 4 full-time workers in the United States earning less than $10 an hour. You know who the poverty-wage people are in the United States now? Workers. These are not people who are not working. People who are working are the ones who are going to sleep hungry at night because our corporations are taking control. So yes, we have some problems in our history and our current approach. I was going to talk about this in my closing, but I'll mention it now. The great thing about American values is that what we want to be is a more perfect union. That is what I love about America, that we strive to be a more perfect union, better than we were, to be what we can be. And I think we have a lot of work to do in that. We've seen the work with ending Jim Crow, with ending slavery, with giving women equal rights under the law, the right to vote. Those are the kinds of changes that we're making. I applaud in our history. Obviously, what we've done is filled with blemishes.
Your time is up,
Mr. Zeese. We have a more perfect union as an opportunity.
Thank you. Mr. Steele, you have the last question before we go to closing statement. I must confess I'm a little uncomfortable about this question because it's something that happened recently in the news. And that is a congressman from Florida had to resign because there were questions of improprieties with pages in the United States Capitol. There are questions swirling now as to whether or not the Speaker of the House acted properly. While I know it's early in an investigation, give us your feel for what went right or wrong in that whole issue.
Let me begin by sharing with you what I felt when I first heard the news. I felt disgusted. I felt ticked off, quite frankly, for a number of reasons. I thought about my own 15-year-old son who maybe one day could work as a page on the Hill. I think about my friends whose children do currently work in that system. And the total lack of disregard for those young people, to see them as sexual objects, to prey on them, is conduct unbecoming any member of the United States Congress. Foley deserved to resign, and I'm glad he did, because otherwise the Congress should have taken a vote immediately to expel him, because his conduct was, quite frankly, disgusting. Now we're in the next phase of this. He is gone. And in typical Washington fashion, you have two camps that emerge. The one that wants to circle the wagon, and the other one that wants to call for a head, any head. On matters of such sensitivity, particularly involving the young people of our nation, who our parents entrust to this system, we need to make sure we carefully investigate, thoroughly investigate every member who touched this matter. And if they are found conduct unbecoming, then they too should resign before they are removed.
Including the Speaker?
Including the Speaker.
Very good.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're at the closing statements. By draw of the lot, Mr. Steele, you have the first one. Each candidate will have 5 minutes.
I want to begin by thanking again my friends at the Urban League, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here for the first time to engage with my colleagues up here. This has been very exciting. It has been a very unique opportunity in Maryland history, as Kevin noted, because for the first time you had a chance to see a variety of opinions and views on a host of issues. Over the next 5 weeks, you'll have an opportunity to hear more and to consider what these three individuals bring to the table as a potential United States Senate. This is a unique opportunity for Maryland. It is unlike any we've ever experienced. A Senate seat is a terrible thing to waste. And my hope and my prayer is that the people of Maryland will take the time to listen. That's all I've ever asked. And all that I have done in public life is that you take the time to listen. You may not agree with me on every issue. You may find it sometimes difficult to overcome my party affiliation. But what I'm asking you to do is to consider the man who stands before you, to consider the opportunity that history presents us. Consider the work that I have done as your lieutenant governor in your neighborhoods, in your communities, your hospitals, your schools. Consider openly, not by party affiliation, not by color of skin, but by the quality and content of the character of the men before you. Who's going to represent your interest in those tough moments? Who's going to be willing to stand against party and politics to vote your interest? This election is about you. I end the way I began, by saying this is about you. We are the catalysts that have risen before you to ask you to send us to Washington to carry on your business, the people's business. I'm asking you for your vote tonight. I'm asking you to consider me as someone who will roll up his sleeve and will work on behalf of the people of the state, as I have over the last 4 years. Who's not afraid to walk into the breach, who's not afraid of what lies through those doors, but is willing to link arms with the people of Maryland and walk together and work together to improve the quality of life and to address those issues that are so near and dear to all of us. When I get up in the morning, I, like so many of you, hope today will be better than yesterday. As I sit down at night and try to balance my checkbook and realize I do not have a trust fund, But what I do have is the trust that I will be able to fund the obligations I have for my family, to pay for my kids' education, to make a better life for my family. As a small entrepreneur, I know what that's like to realize that you're not getting paid today, but that tomorrow, well, tomorrow maybe you will. And you're still inspired. You're still inspired to get up and go into your office and to go into your business because you own it. You own it. You want to deal with poverty, ladies and gentlemen? Let's talk about ownership. You want to deal with poor education, ladies and gentlemen? Let's talk about ownership. You want to talk about improving the quality of life of someone who's in trouble, drug addicted, can't read, just incarcerated. Let's talk about how we help them become owners. When I visit the Baltimore Detention Center and I'm looking in the eyes of a 13-year-old boy who's in jail, I tell him very honestly, I have not given up on you. I'm asking you not to give up on me, to trust me to represent you fairly, honestly, and openly as your next United States Senator. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Cardin, 2 minutes.
Thank you. First, let me thank the Urban League for making this available. I think this has been extremely helpful. Mr. Zeese, let me first urge you to change your webpage. If you have on the webpage that I support the embassy in Iraq, I have voted against the embassy in Iraq. And let me say, in regards to the war in Iraq, I've been a consistent opponent of this president, and I think my record reflects that. Did I support our troops? You bet I did, to make sure they have what they need in order to be safe and carry out their mission. Now, let me also just very briefly comment on the Foley issue. I wasn't going to comment on it tonight, but I was listening to Mr. Steele. And it's a very serious issue. And I heard what he said about the immediate action against Mr. Foley. Well, I would hope that he would have used the word immediate as it relates to Republican leaders that may very well have withheld action for 10 months. The press has reported, and it has been acknowledged, that the leadership of the House knew about this for 10 months. And we are talking about the safety of our children. So immediate action is needed there also. I know a little bit about the ethics issues. I was on the Ethics Committee for 6 years. I was the ranking Democrat in the investigation of Newt Gingrich. We held Newt Gingrich accountable for his actions. Democrats and Republicans working together to preserve the integrity of the institution. That's what we need to do. I've been able to do that. My entire career has been based upon an ethical standard that puts the integrity first. And I'll continue to do that in the United States Senate. And to Mr. Steele, let me say, I don't disagree. I don't have any objection about your party affiliation. You're a Republican, that's fine. We know that. You're former chair of the Republican Party. You spoke at the National Convention. We know that. You're recruited by George Bush to run here in Maryland. That's fine. My concern is where you stand on the issues. Because I can tell you this. I'm going to get Republican votes. I'm seeking Republican votes in this election. I'm seeking independent votes in this election. I'm seeking votes for people who agree with me on the issues. So my concern is, where do you stand on the issues that affect the future of our state and nation? And let me just start first with the budget priorities. We talk an awful lot about what's happening in Washington. You want to bring about change. You can't bring about change if you're going to support George Bush's budgets. Because it starts with, you're going to put the tax cuts for the wealthy ahead of the needs of this nation. Are you going to put staying the course in Iraq beyond changing priorities here in America? Are you going to put taking on the special interest in health care above changing direction in America? That's my concern, is where you stand on the issues. And by what I hear, it seems like you're pretty much in agreement with George Bush on his budget priorities. And I disagree with that. And that's why I'm asking Democrats and Republicans and independents to support my candidacy. I believe that we need to change the direction of America. I think Mr. Steele and I have fundamental differences. We haven't had a chance tonight to talk about stem cell research. We haven't had a chance tonight to talk about some of the other fundamental issues, women's right of choice, some of the other issues on which we have fundamental disagreements on. We talked a little bit about the war in Iraq. There's a fundamental difference there. We made a mistake going to Iraq. Michael Steele believes it was the right thing to do. Well, we disagree on that. These are the issues that I want the voters to concentrate on. In all due respect, it's not about how nice we appear or how we deal with friendliness or how well we listen, because I'm a pretty good listener. I got 2 little granddaughters and I listen to them all the time. I'm a good listener. It's about how you are going to represent the interests of the people of Maryland. Whether you're prepared to put our families first, whether you're prepared to change the direction of America in a fundamental way. Katrina was a wake-up call to this nation that we need to do things differently. I responded immediately to that, saying it was wrong. We should have protected our people. We didn't. We should have acted, and we didn't. It's a fundamental problem with the values of our leadership in Washington. We've got to change that. It starts with keeping the seat in Maryland with an independent United States Senator who will stand up to George Bush when he is wrong, who will work across party line to get things done when it's in the interest of Marylanders to do that, and has a record that backs up what he says. I ask for your support. I ask for your support on November the 7th so we really can change the direction of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cardin. Mr. Zeese.
I agree with Mr. Cardin. Let's send an independent to the United States Senate. First off, I want to thank the Urban League again for sponsoring this event and my colleagues for coming and participating. It was really a lot of fun. I hope we got some good issues out. And I hope that we can have a whole series of debates like this, because I think it's important for the voters to hear what we stand for and let us be compared and contrasted next to each other. I've been running for 1.5 years for the United States Senate, and I'm running to win. I'm not running for a message. The reason I am running is because I see fantastic potential for this country. I talked earlier about the more perfect union. We can be a more perfect union. There's a vision that I have for this country that I'm sure many of you share. My goal is to shrink the difference between what is and what could be. That is my goal, to make this country a more perfect union. And it can happen. I can imagine a country where we are not addicted to fossil fuels of the 19th and 20th century, where we're destroying the earth, where we are threatening our economy, we are threatening our national security. We have the technology, we have the resources, we have the people to change this economy to a clean, sustainable 21st century economy, and that's where we need to go. I see a country where we can have automobiles that are hybrid plug-ins. Plug it into a house that's generated by solar and wind and tidal energy, and then the car runs for 100 miles on pure, clean, electrically generated energy. That technology is available. I can see a transportation system that connects our country, our state, from National Place to BWI, to Baltimore, to Columbia, to Frederick. We need that kind of transportation system. We can have that kind of transportation system. I see a country that really puts education first, that really makes preschool through post-high school education, through college, free for all Americans, so we can be an educated, competitive society. I see a country that provides health care to all in an affordable and comprehensive way throughout our lifetimes. And a foreign policy that is based on negotiation and diplomacy, not based on shock and awe, where the United States leads the world by our example, where we're not threatening and terrorizing prisoners, where we're not threatening and terrorizing countries. I see this possibility. I know our country has been imperfect in the past. It has many serious blemishes, from Jim Crow to slavery, to women not voting, to women not owning property. But we can change these things. We can become more perfect union. We can shrink the difference between what can be and what is. But we cannot do that by relying on 2 status quo parties that are do that based on two status quo parties that are indebted to the special interests that control Washington, D.C. The great thing I see about America is that we have the resources, we have the technology, we have the people. What we don't have is the leadership. Now, I can't do it alone. I know I can't do it alone. But I can tell you this, if I become a U.S. Senator, you will be proud to have me as your U.S. Senator. You will have a senator who stands for the people first. I will have every Friday afternoon, my doors will be open to Marylanders to come in so I can listen to what the concerns of Marylanders are. I don't have to go back to Hawaii or California to fundraise. I live in Montgomery County. I can stay in town on Friday and listen to Maryland voters. The challenge of the day is to transform our government to one that puts the people first, not the special interest. The fundamental change will not come from my competitors. You know what is needed. So I ask you on Election Day, I ask you before Election Day, support my candidacy, give me your vote, get involved in our campaign. We can change the direction of America. We can do it together. Get involved. Let's make America great. Thank you all very much.
A big favor and give these folks a big hand.
You guys are both great. I gotta tell you, this is a great debate.
Before they leave, I need to just do a little bit of housekeeping. If you have a seat for a minute.
Nice to see you.
First of all, I want to thank Donnie Glover for his great questions. Will y'all give him a big hand?